So in Doom Patrol Sex Patrol, the sex men show up when Flex Mantella and Rita Farr trigger a paranormal sexual event which causes a spike in hypersexual energy, which attracts a sex demon, which could lead to worldwide sextinction. Do I even have to make a joke about this? In this episode, when they're trying to revive Danny the Street with a party at the mansion with Flex Mantella and Morally Corrupt and the other characters, I came to wonder if this wasn't a diversion too far. But before I get into my thoughts on this episode with spoilers, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And if you like anything I say, please give me a like. I'd appreciate it. So, getting into this episode, I think that this show, its two strengths have always been its ability to just have wacky fun and its ability to simultaneously explore the pathos of its characters. And I unfortunately felt that this episode didn't do either of those things very well. And as far as wacky fun goes, I just didn't think that this party was very much fun. I actually was kind of confused why Dorothy got sent to bed, because nothing seemed to be going on when she snuck back down after Niles sent her up and the candle maker in her head told her she should go back down. I was expecting her to get exposed to things that she shouldn't see as a child. As a child character, I realized that the actress is an adult, thanks to someone in the comments section correcting me in the first video. But I was expecting that to be the point, is that she'd get triggered by something she saw at this party that was too much for her. But that never really happened. And this is kind of something that I noticed a lot in this episode, that there weren't really any new insights or any new developments for characters in terms of what happened at the beginning of the episode and how it played out through the end of the episode. In fact, I think a big problem with this episode was there wasn't really much structure to it at all, and the sex demon didn't show up until way too late in the episode, and neither did the sex men, and that was when the nominal plot started to kick in. But at that point, the episode had kind of just been wandering willy-nilly for too long for my taste. And again, I think that if you're going to go in this really wacky, nonsensical direction, just really go for it. Just be crazy fun. But I just didn't feel like this was crazy fun. It just seemed like kind of a lame party. Like people were kind of dancing around and talking and drinking, but that was it. It was not an exciting party. And I know that in previous episodes, when we've seen Morally Corrupt and Danny the Street, there's been a lot more energy and there's been a lot more things to engage interest. And I would compare this episode to the episode where Negative Man, where we had that wonderful fantasy sequence where he imagined himself singing on the stage, and then we found out that it was a fantasy sequence and he just says, "I don't sing." That was great. There's nothing like that in this episode that approaches that. There wasn't anything like that for any of the characters. And I think they tried. They put in a couple of musical sequences, and as usual, they've got some catchy songs. I thought that when they had Dorothy sing Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, I thought that was going to be a more exciting sequence than it ultimately ended up being. And they had Flex Mantella using his powers this episode. He's a likable character. I'm sure he's a fan favorite, although I don't really know what people's reactions to him is. But compared to the way that he used his powers last season in some hilarious and hilariously unintentioned ways, this episode he used his powers in really boring and lame ways. Like he lifted Dorothy up so that she could hook a light up to the ceiling. But legitimately, it was just Dorothy, the actress, being lifted up to the ceiling on a string. There was nothing particularly exciting about that, and all the other effects that they were using to show off Mantella's powers were equally dull and not that interesting. It's funny with Cliff or Robot Man how I love this character. He's probably my favorite character in the show, But this episode, they decided to have him be on ecstasy that Niles figured out how to give him as kind of an apology. And this was just a bad idea to me, because his problem is he's already the most reckless and emotionally unstable character. I mean, you could argue it's Crazy Jane, but I personally think it's him, because he's just so angry all the time. And all he does is dance around the whole episode, and there's really no arc for his character. And not that every character has to have an arc every episode, but I don't think any of these characters really had arcs. Dorothy finds out that Danny the Street was actually holding her prisoner, but she doesn't really do anything in response to that. She just finds this out. And she's kind of struggling with the candle maker pushing her to do bad things, but she never really does anything bad. So again, there wasn't really any action taken by her character. Niles, this episode, didn't even seem to realize that Danny the Street had been holding his daughter captive. He's like, that's not how he viewed it. And when Danny the Street makes it clear to him that that's how they see it, he seems quite surprised. And Jane, of course, we left her in the underground last episode, and she's been taken out of commission as the primary. But really not a whole lot developed this episode. She just eventually when she found out that the sex demon was going to end the world if the baby that was born from the paranormal sexual event cried, then she just goes and shoves the baby up his crotch. And I mean, this was weird and wacky, and it kind of just reminds me of the cockroach and the mouse making out sequence at the end of the first season. And I know a lot of people thought that that was hilarious and wonderful. I just thought it was stupid and frankly not what I watch this show for, which you may question why I watch this show, but I just didn't feel like it was entertaining or funny. It was just bizarre and silly, and I was getting serious Ghostbusters vibes from the sex men, and not in a good way, more in like a cheesy, what are these characters doing in this show sort of way. They didn't have enough screen time to really make an impression. As I said, they showed up really late in the episode and really too late to make much of an impression. Rita, we got a little bit of emotional insight into her, more insight into her messed up condition, in that she saw her mother sleep with a producer in order to get her apart as a child, but we only really see this happen. We don't really see how this affects her. And I guess we can infer that it is part of what has damaged her confidence and is keeping her from using her powers effectively, that she's not able to go blank the way that Flex Mantella is and use his powers so effectively, because whenever she tries to, there's this damage, there's this underlying pain that keeps her from doing that. So that's insightful, but it's a small insight, and she just spends the whole episode having a continuous orgasm in the room with Flex Mantella that triggers the sex demon's appearance. So not a lot there either. Robot Man, as I said, in the comics, he's the one who defeats the sex demon, but here they have Jane do it, I think, to kind of play off of the knowledge of people who have read the comics, so that they can kind of make them think they know what's going to happen and then go in a different direction, which I always like when they do that. But there's not really any reason that Jane should be the one to take out this character. It makes sense for Robot Man to do it because he's the only one who has no sexual desires, so that would be the perfect role for him, the perfect mission for him, and yet they don't use him in it, and they didn't really give a good reason for it. Just basically he said he didn't want to kill a baby, which, again, this show, man, they go so far sometimes. Thankfully, it was not particularly disturbing because it was an ugly, very, very disturbing looking CGI baby. I don't think anyone was terribly upset by the baby's fate. There was a lot of gratuitous sexuality this episode, but what were we expecting in an episode called Sex Patrol? And that's basically it. I think I've covered everything that happened more or less. Danny the Street ended up as a tire, and Morally Corrupt gave a pretty good speech to Cyborg, but I really didn't see how the speech related to Cyborg's situation. It seemed more like they wanted Morally Corrupt to be able to talk about how the world treats outsiders and misfits, and it was a good speech. I'm not going to take that away from it, but it didn't really seem applicable to Cyborg's situation. The only part of it that was applicable was kind of the tagline at the end, which was, if you love someone, just go be with them. Don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about what the world thinks, essentially, which I guess is sort of applicable, but the majority of the speech was just talking about morally corrupt situation. But look, those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you think I'm an idiot, if you thought this was the best episode of Doom Patrol ever, let me know. I'm interested to hear. And if you're new to the channel and if you're interested in seeing my weekly reviews of Doom Patrol and other shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, you can watch more videos right now.